A criminal jury acquits Robert Blake of murder. A civil jury finds him liable for $30 million in the very same death. Phil Spector's first jury deadlocks, and his second convicts him for life. Michael Jace dials 911 and confesses while his children are still in the house. 15 cases where stars were tied to the deaths of their spouses or partners, and the verdicts hinged entirely on what the evidence could prove. On the night of May 4th, 2001, Bonnie Lee Backley sat in the passenger seat of a parked Dodge Stealth outside Vitello's restaurant in Studio City. Minutes earlier, her husband, actor Robert Blake, said he had left the table to retrieve a handgun he believed was left behind in their booth. When he returned, Backley had been shot twice, once in the head and once in the right shoulder. Blake called 911 at 9:40 p.m., his voice recorded as frantic and pleading. Police arrived to find no weapon in Blake's possession and minimal gunshot residue on his hands. The investigation quickly focused on Blake. Prosecutors charged him with first-degree murder, 2 counts of solicitation to commit murder, and conspiracy. Their case relied on circumstantial evidence, including alleged financial motives, a list of so-called handyman tools found with an associate, and inconsistent statements. Forensics identified a World War II-era Walther P-38 pistol found in a nearby dumpster as the murder weapon, but no fingerprints or serial number linked it to Blake. No eyewitness saw the shooting, and luminol tests turned up no blood on Blake's clothing. Jury instructions in the criminal trial emphasized that conviction required proof beyond a reasonable doubt. With no direct forensic link and gaps in the prosecution's timeline, the jury acquitted Blake of all charges in March 2005. Months later, Backley's family filed a civil wrongful death suit. Here, the standard shifted to a preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not. The same circumstantial facts, motive, opportunity, and the handyman list were enough for a civil jury to find Blake liable. They awarded $30 million, later reduced to $15 million after Blake filed for bankruptcy in 2006. The homicide remains officially unsolved, but the split verdicts stand as a textbook example of how the law draws its lines between doubt and liability. In the early hours of February 3, 2003, Lana Clarkson was found dead in the marble foyer of Phil Spector's Alhambra mansion. The single gunshot wound to her mouth and the blood spatter on Spector's white jacket set the stage for a forensic battle that would stretch over 6 years and 2 criminal trials. Spector told police the shooting was accidental, later insisting Clarkson had taken her own life. Detectives recovered a .38 caliber revolver near Clarkson's body, but no fingerprints or DNA linked Spector directly to the weapon. The autopsy confirmed close-range discharge, with extensive oral trauma and no defensive wounds. High-velocity backspatter on Spector's jacket became the prosecution's linchpin. Dr. Lynn Harold, the county's lead blood spatter analyst, testified that the fine mist on Spector's lapel and sleeve placed him within 2 feet of the muzzle, arms raised. The defense countered with a physicist's simulation, arguing that muzzle gases could have redirected the blood, creating ambiguity about the shooter's position. Jurors in the first trial could not agree. 10 favored conviction, and 2 held out for acquittal, leading to a mistrial in September 2007. By the time of the 2009 retrial, the prosecution had refined its case. New physics-based demonstrations showed that the spatter pattern was most consistent with the shooter standing in front of Clarkson, not beside or behind her. Testimony from Spector's former acquaintances described a history of threats and gun brandishing, reinforcing the prosecution's narrative. The jury found Spector guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 19 years to life in prison. The retrial's outcome underscored how evolving forensic testimony and the weight jurors give to expert analysis can tip the scales from uncertainty to conviction, even in the glare of celebrity. At 8:30 p.m. on June 17, 2014, Michael Jace picked up the phone and dialed 911 from his family home in Los Angeles. His voice, captured on the emergency recording, was flat and controlled. He said, "I shot my wife." Officers arrived to find April Jace, a 40-year-old mother of two, dead from 2 gunshot wounds in the hallway. Their children, ages 8 and 5, were inside the house at the time of the shooting. Jace told police he had been cleaning his .40 caliber handgun when it discharged by accident. The physical evidence told a different story. April was shot in the legs at close range, and investigators found no cleaning materials or gun oil nearby. Forensic teams recovered gunshot residue on Jace's hands and matched the bullets to his registered firearm. The couple's history included previous domestic disturbances. Police records showed multiple calls to the address for arguments and suspected violence in the years leading up to April's death. In the days after the arrest, prosecutors filed charges of first-degree murder, arguing that Jace had acted with intent. They presented the 911 call as the backbone of their case, a rare instance where the suspect's own words left little room for doubt. The trial drew national attention, but the facts remained straightforward. On May 31, 2016, a Los Angeles jury found Michael Jace guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 40 years to life in state prison. The presence of a recorded confession, combined with a documented pattern of abuse, left the jury with a clear path to conviction. That outcome stood in sharp contrast to cases where evidence was circumstantial or contested. April 4, 1958. Johnny Stompanato, a known associate of organized crime, arrived at Lana Turner's Beverly Hills home during a heated argument. Inside, Turner's 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl Crane, confronted Stompanato with a kitchen knife. Accounts from the inquest record Crane striking a single fatal blow to his abdomen. Stompanato collapsed in the hallway and died from internal bleeding before paramedics arrived. Police secured the scene, and Turner gave a statement describing threats and violence leading up to the stabbing. The case bypassed a criminal trial. Instead, a coroner's jury convened at the Los Angeles County Hall of Justice. Over the course of 2 days, jurors heard testimony from Turner, Crane, and a neighbor who reported hearing screams. Medical examiners confirmed the wound was consistent with a defensive act. On April 11, 1958, the jury returned a verdict of justifiable homicide. No charges were filed against Crane. The official record closed the case in less than 2 weeks, with the verdict form citing self-defense, an outcome rare in cases involving celebrity households and allegations of mob retaliation. The legal process for Barbara Graham unfolded in stark contrast. On June 3, 1955, Graham entered the gas chamber at San Quentin State Prison, becoming one of the few women executed in California's modern era. Her conviction stemmed from the March 1953 robbery and murder of Mabel Monahan, a 71-year-old widow in Burbank. Prosecutors charged Graham alongside 2 male accomplices. The trial relied heavily on testimony from an undercover informant and forensic evidence linking Graham to the scene. The jury found her guilty of first-degree murder and robbery. Appeals for clemency failed, and the execution was carried out as scheduled. Graham's case became a national spectacle, inspiring the film I Want to Live, and sparking debate over the reliability of her conviction. The court's records document a swift progression from arrest to execution, highlighting the era's willingness to impose the death penalty, even as lingering doubts about evidence persisted. In these mid-century cases, the spectrum of verdicts, from immediate exoneration to capital punishment, depended not only on the facts, but on the legal forum and the public's appetite for resolution. On February 2, 1922, William Desmond Taylor, a leading silent film director, was found dead in his Los Angeles bungalow. A bullet passed from his left cheek to behind his right ear. Police found no forced entry, only a shattered wine glass on his desk. The crime scene quickly filled with reporters and studio executives, erasing traces that might have pointed to the killer. The coroner's report confirmed a close-range shot from a .38 caliber pistol, yet no powder burns appeared, and the weapon itself was never found. Ballistics later matched the bullet to a revolver owned by actress Mabel Normand, but no charges followed. The original case file, still in county archives, remains marked as unsolved. Over time, rumors and theories multiplied, but the early mishandling of evidence left the truth out of reach. In October 1978, Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols was arrested after Nancy Spungen was found dead from a stab wound in their Chelsea hotel room. Vicious, disoriented and unable to recall the night, gave conflicting statements. The NYPD recovered a blood-stained kitchen knife, but forensic tests could not tie it to him. Witnesses heard arguments and a scream, but saw nothing. Charged with second-degree murder, Vicious was released on bail. Before trial, he died of a heroin overdose on February 2, 1979. With his death, the court dismissed the case. The Spungen homicide remains officially unresolved, closed only by circumstance, not by proof. Celebrity does not erase the legal standard, but public scrutiny, media pressure, and access to top defense teams often complicate the path to justice. Today, high-profile defendants still face different courtroom dynamics. Each verdict reminds us the law is equal in theory, but the outcome is rarely impartial in practice.
They said, "Till death do us part," and meant it literally. These weren't breakups or scandals. These were marriages that ended in body bags, and somehow the stars who caused them kept their careers. Fatty Arbuckle's career destroyed. Hollywood was barely 20 years old when it met its first real scandal. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was one of the biggest stars in silent comedy, earning more than Charlie Chaplin. In September 1921, he threw a weekend party at San Francisco's Street Francis Hotel. By the next day, actress Virginia Rapp was found critically ill in his suite. She died 4 days later. Newspapers exploded with headlines calling Arbuckle a monster. Reporters claimed she'd been attacked, and public outrage spread faster than any official report. Police charged him with manslaughter, then murder. Movie theaters pulled his films overnight. What actually happened in that hotel room remains unclear. Witnesses contradicted each other. The prosecution leaned on rumor and moral panic more than evidence. During the first two trials, juries couldn't agree. By the third, the defense revealed medical records showing Rappe had long suffered from chronic bladder issues. The final jury deliberated for only 6 minutes before declaring Arbuckle innocent and even apologized to him in writing for what he'd endured. But Hollywood didn't forgive. Studios quietly blacklisted him. Theater owners refused to show his films. Arbuckle tried directing under a fake name just to work again. By the time the scandal faded, the damage was permanent. He died in 1933, the same week he'd finally signed a new studio contract to act again. For years, the case was used as proof that early Hollywood's glamour hid darker sides, media frenzy, moral judgment, and a man who, despite an acquittal, never truly cleared his name. Paul Kelly's fatal jealousy. Hollywood had seen scandals before, but Paul Kelly's case hit differently. He wasn't a slapstick clown or a troubled starlet. He was a respected stage actor on the rise. That changed the night he picked a fight with another man over love. The trouble started with actress Dorothy Mackay. She was married to actor Ray Raymond but was secretly seeing Kelly. When Raymond confronted him about the affair in May 1927, it ended violently. Witnesses said Kelly punched him again and again until Raymond collapsed. He died 2 days later from his injuries. Police arrested Kelly within hours. The story made front pages nationwide. Newspapers called it a crime of passion, while the film industry rushed to distance itself. In court, Kelly's lawyers argued self-defense, but the evidence showed otherwise. The jury convicted him of manslaughter. His sentence, 10 years. He served just over 2. By 1930, Kelly walked free, clean-shaven and ready to act again. Hollywood didn't shut the door for long. He married Mackay after her own short sentence for covering up evidence, and the pair returned to the stage. Within a decade, he was starring in major films like The Roaring Twenties. No one mentioned Ray Raymond anymore. The studios treated the killing like an unfortunate misunderstanding, proof that charm and talent could outlive guilt. Kelly worked steadily until his death in 1956, his record reduced to a footnote. It was one of early Hollywood's quietest comebacks. A man who killed for love, served 2 years, and kept his career intact. Thelma Todd and Roland West. It started with a locked door on a cold December night. Thelma Todd, the glamorous ice cream blonde of 1930s comedies, was found lifeless inside her car in her Pacific Palisades garage. The engine was running, and the doors were shut tight. Police called it accidental carbon monoxide poisoning, but the scene didn't sit right with anyone. Todd's face showed bruising. Neighbors heard shouting the night before. Her business partner and rumored lover, director Roland West, lived just upstairs. He admitted they'd argued after she came home late from a Hollywood party. The official report said she simply fell asleep in her car with the engine on. The coroner didn't buy it. Neither did the tabloids. The case became front-page news for weeks, fueled by whispers that West had locked her out in anger, trapping her in the garage. When asked, he claimed he didn't remember much of that night. No one was ever charged. The death was ruled accidental, and Hollywood moved on. West kept silent until his own death decades later, reportedly confessing to a friend that he had closed the door on her without realizing she couldn't get out. For fans, the mystery never ended. Todd's restaurant, still standing today, became a tourist stop for crime buffs chasing answers that never came. The actress who made millions laugh left behind one of Hollywood's earliest cold cases, a mix of tragedy, rumor, and a silence that never broke. William S. Burroughs' William Tell Killing. A drunken party in Mexico City turned into one of literature's darkest moments. William S. Burroughs, already known among beat writers in Hollywood's bohemian crowd, pulled a pistol from his bag. He told friends he was going to play William Tell. His wife, Joan Vollmer, balanced a glass on her head. Seconds later, she was fatally shot in the forehead. Witnesses said there was no game, just chaos. Burroughs claimed it was a tragic accident. Mexican police arrested him immediately, but he made bail and slipped away before the case went to trial. He never spent a single day in prison. The U.S. press barely covered it. His family used connections to keep headlines quiet. Years later, Burroughs admitted in interviews that the killing haunted him. Still, it didn't stop his career. He became a literary icon, publishing Naked Lunch and moving in circles that treated the incident as part of his legend. Behind the fame was a woman whose death never saw justice. No court ever examined the evidence. The bullet hole, the witnesses, the flight from prosecution, all left unresolved. Burroughs continued to give readings and appear in films, often cast as the eccentric intellectual. When asked about Joan's death, he called it the event that made him a writer. For many, it sounded less like regret and more like confession. Spade Cooley's murderous rage. The king of Western swing had everything: money, fame, and a hit TV show that made him one of the biggest country entertainers of the 1950s. But behind the spotlight, Spade Cooley was unraveling. His temper was violent, his jealousy constant, and his wife, Ella May, had filed for divorce. On the 3rd of April, 1961, their 4-year-old daughter came home to a nightmare. Police later confirmed that Cooley had beaten Ella May to death in their California home. The injuries were so severe that investigators called it one of the worst domestic attacks they'd ever seen. At trial, Cooley blamed stress and claimed she'd confessed to an affair moments before he lost control. The jury didn't buy it. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. That should have been the end of the story. But Cooley's fame followed him into his cell. Fans sent letters of support, and California's governor personally approved his parole after less than 9 years. In 1969, during a prison furlough concert, Cooley collapsed and died of a heart attack. minutes after bragging to reporters that he was free again. His early release stunned the public. A man who'd once sold out concert halls had killed his wife in cold blood and nearly walked back into show business. Hollywood's memory of him faded fast, but the message lingered: fame could bend justice, even for murder. Lana Turner and the Stompanato killing. The scream that night came from inside Lana Turner's Beverly Hills home. When police arrived, they found Johnny Stompanato, her boyfriend, lying on the bedroom floor with a knife wound to the stomach. Turner's 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl Crane, was holding the weapon. Minutes earlier, Stompanato had threatened Turner during another violent argument. Cheryl ran into the room, grabbed a kitchen knife, and tried to protect her mother. One quick motion ended his life. Within hours, every radio and newspaper in America carried the story. The press called it the most shocking tragedy in Hollywood. Turner testified through tears at the coroner's inquest, describing years of abuse and fear. Witnesses confirmed that Stompanato had beaten her before. The jury ruled Cheryl's action justifiable homicide, a legal term for self-defense. The teenager was released into her grandmother's custody, and no charges were filed. The case became an instant media circus. Crowds followed the mother and daughter to court, cheering as if it were a movie premiere. MGM even rushed Turner into a new film, Imitation of Life, playing a mother whose daughter turns against her. The timing was eerie and the box office record-breaking. Behind the glamour sat a real family shaken by violence. Turner never publicly spoke of Stompanato again. Cheryl grew up under constant scrutiny, her name forever tied to the night she saved her mother's life. Claudine Longet's fatal shot. Snow was falling outside the Aspen home of Olympic skier Spider Savage when police arrived. Inside, they found singer and actress Claudine Longet crying on the floor beside him. Savage had been fatally shot with a .22 caliber pistol. Longet told officers it was an accident. She said the gun fired while he was showing her how it worked. The couple had been together for several years, but friends told investigators their relationship was falling apart. Savage wanted her out of the house. Prosecutors believed the shooting happened during an argument, not a lesson. At trial, Longet's lawyers argued that the gun had a faulty trigger. The judge barred the jury from hearing key forensic evidence and even sealed the couple's private diaries. In March 1977, she was convicted of negligent homicide, a misdemeanor. Her sentence, 30 days in jail, served on weekends, plus a small fine. The public reaction was harsh. Headlines called it Hollywood justice. Savage's family protested the ruling, claiming wealth and fame had tilted the scales. Still, Longet's sentence stood. After her release, she quietly left the spotlight. Her music sales dropped, and she stopped performing. Yet, she never expressed guilt. When asked years later, one friend said she still called the shooting an accident that took everything. The case became a textbook example of celebrity privilege in the 1970s, a fatal shooting, a short sentence, and a career that faded without real closure. Gig Young's wedding night killing. Hours after saying "I do," Oscar-winning actor Gig Young was dead, and so was his new wife. The couple had married only 3 weeks earlier in a small ceremony. On the 19th of October, 1978, police found them inside their New York apartment, Young on the floor, his wife Kim Schmidt beside him. Each had been shot once. A revolver lay near his hand. Friends told detectives he had been struggling for years with alcoholism, depression, and erratic behavior. Just months earlier, a film crew had removed him from a movie set because he couldn't stay sober. What made the case so shocking was how fast it happened. Schmidt was just 31, a magazine editor with no history of trouble. They'd met only weeks before the wedding. On paper, it looked like a happy new start for a troubled star. Behind the scenes, everyone knew Young had been unraveling. No note was found, and no warning signs were reported. Hollywood responded with silence. Studios released brief condolences, but no one talked about how one of their own had spiraled so far. For years, fans remembered Gig Young as the charming MC from They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Not the man who ended his career in tragedy. His death was ruled final, the file closed in days. but it left a dark reminder that even an Oscar couldn't mask the chaos behind the camera. Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen. Hotel staff at the Chelsea in New York knew the noise from room 100 wasn't normal. When security finally entered, Nancy Spungen was on the bathroom floor with a single stab wound to her stomach. Her boyfriend, Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols, was sitting nearby in a daze. Police arrested him immediately. He told officers, "I stabbed her, but I didn't mean to." Later, he changed his story, saying he woke up and found her dead. Detectives never recovered clear evidence. No fingerprints on the knife, no witnesses to the fight. The case against him was weak, but it didn't matter. The press had its villain. Out on bail, Vicious spiraled even harder. He overdosed on heroin multiple times and was arrested again for assault. Then, in February 1979, he took another fatal dose and never woke up. The murder charge was dropped. Nancy was only 20. Sid was 21. Together, they became the dark myth of punk, reckless love, fame, and destruction rolled into one. Hollywood later dramatized their story, turning two real people into pop symbols of chaos. What's left in the record is thin. One dead, one gone, and a police file that closed with more questions than answers. Whether Sid killed Nancy or someone else did, no one ever faced trial. For investigators, the case remains officially unsolved. Tom Neal's fatal marriage. Once Tom Neal had been Hollywood's handsome outsider, the tough guy from Detour who seemed born to play doomed men. Off-screen, he lived up to it. A decade after beating actor Franchot Tone nearly to death in a fight over actress Barbara Payton, Neal was back in headlines for something far worse. On the 2nd of April 1965, police were called to Neal's Palm Springs home. Inside, they found his third wife, Gail Bennett, dead from a gunshot wound to the back of her head. Neal was sitting nearby, calm, holding a towel. He told officers the gun had gone off while he was cleaning it. Neighbors said they'd heard shouting earlier that morning. Detectives doubted his story, but couldn't prove intent. The district attorney reduced the murder charge to involuntary manslaughter. Neal was convicted and sentenced to 10 years, serving just 6 before his release in 1971. He'd already lost his career years before, but the trial sealed his fall. No studio would touch him again. Reporters who once covered his charm now wrote about a man broken by anger and alcohol. Neal died less than a year after leaving prison, found alone in North Hollywood at 58. Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood. The yacht Splendor was anchored off California's Catalina Island when the call came in. Actress Natalie Wood had vanished overnight. Hours later, her body was found floating near the shore, dressed in a red jacket and nightgown. She was 43. Aboard the boat were her husband, actor Robert Wagner, and her Brainstorm co-star, Christopher Walken. The three had been drinking heavily. Crew member Dennis Davern later told investigators he'd heard shouting and a thud before realizing Wood was missing. Wagner claimed she'd gone out to secure a loose dinghy and fallen by accident. The coroner initially ruled the death accidental drowning, but bruises on Wood's arms, a cut on her cheek, and inconsistencies in everyone's stories kept the rumors alive. Decades later, new forensic reviews and witness statements pushed the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to reopen the case in 2011. In 2018, Wagner was officially named a person of interest. He denied wrongdoing and has never been charged. Friends of the couple described their marriage as stormy, marked by jealousy and frequent arguments. Others insisted it was simply a tragic accident on a cold, dark night. O.J. Simpson's not guilty verdict. It began with flashing lights on a Los Angeles freeway. A white Ford Bronco crawled through traffic as millions watched live on television. Inside was O.J. Simpson, former NFL hero and movie star, wanted for the killings of his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman. The crime scene was brutal. Detectives found blood matching Simpson's DNA on a glove near the bodies and another at his home. They found shoe prints from his size, and fibers from his car matched those on the victims. Still, the defense turned the trial into a cultural spectacle. Dubbed the trial of the century, it lasted 9 months. Prosecutors argued motive and physical proof. The defense said the LAPD had planted evidence and targeted Simpson because of race. When Detective Mark Fuhrman was caught lying about racial slurs, the prosecution's case collapsed in front of the cameras. On the 3rd of October 1995, the jury read 2 words that stunned the world: not guilty. Outside the courthouse, cheers and outrage erupted at once. For many, the verdict showed that fame and public sympathy could outweigh even DNA. 2 years later, a civil jury found Simpson liable for the wrongful deaths and ordered him to pay $33.5 million. He never paid most of it. Simpson kept giving interviews insisting he was innocent, while the families of Nicole and Ron were left with a verdict they could never accept: Robert Blake's acquittal. Dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant turned into one of Hollywood's strangest murder cases. On the 4th of May, 2001, actor Robert Blake and his wife, Bonnie Lee Bakley, ate at Vitello's in Studio City. Minutes after leaving, she was found slumped in their car, fatally shot. Blake claimed he had gone back inside to get a gun he'd forgotten, one that police later confirmed was not the murder weapon. Detectives uncovered a tangled backstory. Bakley had a history of scams and relationships with famous men. Blake said he married her only after a DNA test proved he was the father of her baby. Prosecutors argued that resentment and humiliation pushed him to plan her death. The case drew nonstop media attention. Former stuntmen testified that Blake had asked them to take care of his wife, but the witnesses were inconsistent and physical evidence was thin. After a 3-month trial, the jury acquitted him in 2005. Civil court didn't agree. Later that year, another jury found Blake responsible for his wife's death and ordered him to pay $30 million in damages. He declared bankruptcy soon after. Hollywood didn't welcome him back. Studios stopped calling, and Blake spent the rest of his life giving interviews about the trial that defined him. He died in 2023, still insisting he'd been framed. Christian Brando's domestic shooting. The Brando family lived in the spotlight, but in May 1990, that light turned harsh. Christian Brando, son of acting legend Marlon Brando, got into a fight at the family's Mulholland Drive estate in Los Angeles. The argument was with Dag Drolet, the boyfriend of Christian's half-sister Cheyenne. Moments later, a gun went off. Drolet was hit in the face and died instantly. When police arrived, Christian admitted he pulled the trigger but claimed it was an accident. He said he'd been trying to scare Drolet after learning he had allegedly hurt Cheyenne. Investigators never found evidence of abuse, but the story gripped the tabloids. The case mixed celebrity, family drama, and tragedy. Marlon Brando broke down on the witness stand, begging for mercy for his son. The courtroom fell silent as he described his family's nightmare. In the end, prosecutors accepted a plea deal. Christian pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter and illegal use of a firearm. His sentence? 10 years in prison. He served fewer than 5. After his release, he drifted between small roles in legal trouble, struggling with addiction. Cheyenne, devastated by Drolet's death, later took her own life. Christian Brando died in 2008 at just 49, his name forever tied to the night that shattered his family. Phil Spector's Hollywood cover. The mansion at the end of Grandview Drive looked quiet that night. Inside, music producer and occasional actor Phil Spector had brought actress Lana Clarkson home after meeting her at the House of Blues in Los Angeles. Minutes later, a gunshot echoed through the hall. Clarkson was dead, seated in a chair by the front door with a revolver in her mouth. Spector told police it was an accident, she kissed the gun. Investigators didn't believe him. His driver reported hearing Spector walk out and say, "I think I just killed somebody." Detectives also found traces of gunshot residue on his hands and jacket. Hollywood wasn't surprised. For years, Spector's temper and gun obsession were an open secret. Ex-girlfriends described being threatened at gunpoint, yet no one had ever filed charges. Now, those stories became evidence. Still, his money bought time. He posted a $1 million bail and lived free for nearly 6 years before the case reached trial. The first ended with a hung jury. In 2009, a second jury convicted him of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 19 years to life. Clarkson's family said justice had come too late. For many, Spector's long escape from accountability showed how fame could stall even the strongest case. He died in prison in 2021, still insisting he was innocent. 15 Hollywood legends, 15 hidden struggles. Some kept their secrets behind costumes, others behind clever camera tricks, and one star's condition was staring everyone in the face the whole time. Silent star with hidden pain. Lon Chaney grew up speaking with his hands. Both of his parents were deaf, so he learned sign language before most kids even spoke their first words. That skill gave him a rare gift. He could tell a story with only his body and face. When silent films exploded in the 1910s, Chaney already knew how to stand out. He didn't rely on exaggerated gestures like many of his peers. He understood small, sharp movements could say more. That made him a natural choice for grotesque and tragic roles. In The Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1923, he strapped on a heavy hump and twisted his body into Quasimodo. In The Phantom of the Opera, 1925, he terrified audiences with makeup he created himself. Viewers called him the man of 1,000 faces, but very few knew how much he was pushing through behind the scenes. Chaney smoked heavily, often hacking between takes. Doctors warned him about his lungs, but he kept working. By the late 1920s, his cough was constant. When he filmed the talking version of The Unholy Three in 1930, his only sound picture, his voice was rough, his breathing strained. That same year, he collapsed. Doctors found bronchial cancer worsened by years of throat infections. Radiation treatments and surgery followed, but his body was too far gone. He died in August 1930, only 47 years old. Hero with missing fingers. Harold Lloyd looked like the perfect all-American boy. Glasses, bright smile, boundless energy. Audiences in the 1920s thought he was fearless, the kind of guy who could hang off a skyscraper clock without breaking a sweat. What they didn't know was that his right hand was partly fake. In 1919, Lloyd posed for a publicity photo holding what he thought was a harmless prop bomb. It exploded in his hand. The blast tore off his thumb and index finger, and shrapnel burned his face. At first, newspapers reported he might lose his sight and career. Instead, Lloyd recovered fast. A prosthetic glove with special padding hid the missing fingers, and the public never noticed. That glove let him keep making daring comedies, even after the accident, in Safety Last. 1923, he dangled stories above the street, clutching ledges and ropes with the hand that wasn't fully there. The tension was real. Every stunt carried a bigger risk than audiences imagined. Behind the scenes, he was careful about camera angles and kept his glove on at all times. His directors worked around the injury, never letting the audience see the truth. Friends said he treated the accident as just another obstacle, not a reason to slow down. Bombshell with hip dysplasia. Jane Russell became a sensation the moment Howard Hughes pushed her onto the screen in The Outlaw, 1943. She was sold as a sex symbol, the ultimate pin-up girl. But behind the glamorous image, Russell lived with a condition that made even walking painful. She was born with congenital hip dysplasia, a defect where the hip joint doesn't form properly. As a child, she wore braces and suffered constant discomfort. Doctors warned her that she'd live with pain her entire life. Even as Hollywood dressed her in tight gowns and put her under bright lights, the condition never went away. Russell handled it quietly. On set, she limited her movement and learned how to pose in ways that didn't strain her hips. In musical numbers, she was less mobile than other stars, so choreographers designed routines around her. Her stillness became part of her screen persona, sultry, calm, and steady. Few realized it was necessity, not just style. Off-camera, Russell leaned on exercise and medical treatments to manage the condition. She admitted in interviews that the pain was constant, but she refused to let it stop her career. Instead, she turned to singing, stage work, and eventually television, areas where she could control how much she had to move. Veteran with one blind eye. Claude Rains didn't look like a war hero, but World War I left its mark on him for life. While serving in the British Army, he was caught in a poison gas attack. The chemicals scarred his throat, left him nearly blind in one eye, and permanently damaged his vision. From then on, he had no depth perception, a serious problem for any actor on stage. Yet Rains refused to quit. He trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, focusing on voice and presence rather than physicality. His gravelly tone and precise delivery made audiences forget the fact that he often struggled to judge distance. On stage, he sometimes misstepped or bumped into scenery, but he turned those flaws into part of his style. When Hollywood came calling in the 1930s, Rains carried his disability with him. In The Invisible Man, 1933, his first major film role, his face stayed hidden under bandages for most of the movie, but his commanding voice carried the story. He went on to scene-stealing roles in Casablanca, 1942, Notorious, 1946, and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, 1939. Directors knew how to stage him, so the audience never saw his struggle with depth. Friends and co-stars noticed, though. Rains occasionally reached out for props with the wrong hand or misjudged how far away someone was, but on film, the disability disappeared. Viewers only saw charm, menace, or authority, whatever the role demanded. Tragedy after the crash. Montgomery Clift was Hollywood's golden boy in the late 1940s. With his soft voice and raw emotion, he brought a new kind of acting to the screen. By the mid-1950s, he was at the top, starring in From Here to Eternity and earning a reputation as one of the most gifted actors of his generation. Then, in 1956, a car crash changed everything. One night, after leaving a party at Elizabeth Taylor's house, Clift drove down a winding road in Beverly Hills. He lost control and slammed into a telephone pole. Taylor was the first to reach the wreck. She pulled him from the car, saving him from choking on broken teeth and blood. The accident shattered his jaw and nose, left deep facial scars, and damaged his vocal cords. Clift underwent extensive reconstructive surgery, but he never looked the same. Photographers began talking about the longest suicide in Hollywood history as his handsome face became marked by pain and exhaustion. On screen, he tried to hide the scars with lighting and makeup. Still, audiences noticed the change. The physical injuries were only part of it. Clift lived with constant pain and developed a limp from the crash. He leaned heavily on painkillers and alcohol, which fueled his decline. Even so, he gave haunting performances in films like The Misfits, 1961, where his broken body and haunted eyes seemed to match the characters he played. Montgomery Clift was only 45 when he died in 1966, a victim of the damage that began with that crash. His career never fully recovered, but his work after the accident carried a depth that came straight from his hidden suffering. Gangster star with sciatica. James Cagney built his career on speed, quick talk, quick fists, quick steps. He stormed across the screen in films like The Public Enemy, 1931, and became the model for the tough-talking gangster. But while audiences saw power and energy, Cagney often fought through crippling back pain. By the 1940s, Cagney developed severe sciatica, a nerve condition that caused pain to shoot through his lower back and legs. At times, it left him limping or unable to stand for long. Yet he refused to let it stop him. On set, he choreographed his own movements to hide the limp. He adjusted his dance routines, leaning on sharp staccato steps that fit his screen style while protecting his back. In musicals like Yankee Doodle Dandy, 1942, Cagney dazzled with his tap routines. Few knew how much pain went into those kicks and spins. He trained himself to make every move look effortless, even when his body was screaming. The pain grew worse as he aged, forcing him to step away from Hollywood more than once. He spent time on his farm, painting and raising horses, partly because the physical demands of acting had become harder to manage. Still, when he returned for later roles, he brought the same intensity, even if he had to pace himself carefully. Detective with Glass Eye. Peter Falk's trademark squint wasn't an acting choice. It was the result of cancer he fought as a toddler. At age 3, surgeons removed his right eye to stop the disease from spreading. For the rest of his life, he wore a glass eye. The glass eye gave Falk an unusual look. His gaze was never perfectly even, and it sometimes threw people off in auditions. Early on, one studio head told him he'd never be a star because of it. Falk didn't listen. He pushed into television and film, building a reputation as a tough, natural performer. On stage and on set, the glass eye occasionally caused problems. Falk joked that he had trouble hitting his marks because of poor depth perception. Directors worked around it, but most audiences never noticed. Instead, they saw his sharp timing and sly sense of humor. By the 1970s, Falk had become a household name as Lieutenant Columbo, the scruffy TV detective who always looked one step behind but was really 2 steps ahead. Columbo's tilted head and curious squint became iconic, and the disability that once threatened Falk's career became part of what made him unforgettable. Away from the camera, Falk rarely talked about the eye unless asked. He preferred to focus on his work, yet colleagues often remarked on how he turned what others saw as a weakness into a tool. His uneven gaze made Columbo look distracted, only to deliver the knockout line when no one expected it. Actress with severe tremor. Katharine Hepburn never tried to be ordinary. Her clipped voice, fierce independence, and sharp wit made her stand out from the start. But as her career stretched into the 1960s, something else began to define her presence on screen, a tremor that she couldn't hide. The shaking began in her hands, then spread to her head. Doctors diagnosed her with familial essential tremor, a hereditary condition that causes involuntary movement. It wasn't dangerous, but it was impossible to control. Many actors might have retired or tried to cover it up. Hepburn did neither. On set, the tremor was obvious. In Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, 1967, her head shook slightly as she delivered lines, yet her authority filled the screen. Instead of distracting from her performance, the tremor became part of her rhythm. She leaned into it, proving that control wasn't necessary for power. Off-screen, she refused pity. When interviewers asked about the condition, she brushed it aside. Friends said she had no interest in pretending to be flawless. Her career lasted decades longer than most actresses of her generation, tremor and all. By the 1980s and 1990s, the shaking was severe, but she kept appearing in television, movies, and interviews. Younger audiences knew her not only as a screen legend, but also as a woman who never let a disability define her. Stroke that changed a legend. Kirk Douglas was the definition of a Hollywood powerhouse. From Spartacus to Paths of Glory, he built a career on strength, defiance, and grit. Then, in January 1996, at age 79, his life changed in seconds. He suffered a massive stroke that left him with slurred speech and partial paralysis on one side of his face. For many actors, that would have been the end. Speech is the tool of the trade, and Douglas could barely form words. Doctors warned him he might never talk clearly again, but Douglas refused to vanish. He pushed through therapy, practicing for hours every day. His voice never fully returned, yet he worked to be understood. Only a month after the stroke, he shocked Hollywood by appearing at the Academy Awards. Shaking, struggling to speak, he stood before millions and addressed the audience. The crowd gave him a long-standing ovation. It wasn't for Spartacus or the films that made him famous. It was for his refusal to hide. Douglas lived another 24 years, writing books, giving interviews, and making appearances even as his speech remained difficult. His disability was visible, but he carried it with the same fire he had shown on screen. Decline everyone could see. Marlon Brando redefined acting in the 1950s. With A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront, he brought a raw, natural style that changed Hollywood forever. But by the 1980s and 1990s, his career was no longer shaped by his talent alone. His body was failing, and the decline was impossible to miss. Brando gained a massive amount of weight, at times reaching over 300 pounds. He battled diabetes, congestive heart failure, and crippling joint pain. Walking across a set became difficult, and his voice grew heavy and slurred. Directors used camera tricks to work around his health, but even clever framing couldn't fully hide the changes. On the set of The Island of Dr. Moreau, 1996, cast members recalled how Brando often needed long breaks to catch his breath. He wore earpieces so assistants could feed him lines when his memory slipped. What audiences saw on screen looked eccentric, odd costumes, strange choices, but much of it came from a man trying to manage his failing health. By the early 2000s, Brando rarely appeared in public. Reports about his health dominated the news more than his performances. In July 2004, he died from respiratory failure after years of complications from obesity and diabetes. Horror icon with sciatica. Bela Lugosi became immortal the moment he stepped on stage as Dracula in 1927 and carried the role to film in 1931. His deep accent and piercing stare made him a horror legend. But behind the cape and charm, Lugosi lived with a body that never stopped hurting. During World War I, he served as a soldier in the Austro-Hungarian army. Combat injuries left him with chronic back problems. As he aged, the pain grew worse, diagnosed as sciatica nerve pain that shoots from the lower back down the legs. For a man known for physical roles, it was a serious burden. Lugosi endured surgery to ease the pain, but doctors prescribed morphine for relief. He became dependent on it, along with other medications. Still, he kept working, often hiding his discomfort with rigid posture and dramatic movements that suited his gothic roles. Audiences thought he was projecting power and menace. In truth, he was fighting pain with every step. By the 1950s, Lugosi's addiction and health struggles were no longer private. He shocked the public by admitting himself to a California state hospital for treatment, one of the first Hollywood stars to speak openly about dependency. The move earned him respect, but it came late in a career already damaged by illness and typecasting. Actress with childhood polio. Dinah Shore was known for her warm smile and smooth voice. In the 1940s and 1950s, she was one of the most popular singers in America, later hosting her own TV shows. But her career began with a battle that shaped her life from childhood polio. At the age of 2, Shore contracted the disease during a time when treatments were limited. The virus left her right leg weakened and slightly shorter than the left. For the rest of her life, she walked with a mild limp. Doctors told her family she might struggle to live a normal life, let alone one on stage. Her mother refused to let the illness define her. She encouraged Dinah to stay active, pushing her into swimming, tennis, and exercise to strengthen her body. Shore carried that discipline with her into adulthood. On camera, she learned how to stand and move so the limp was barely noticeable. Costumers and directors helped disguise it with clever wardrobe choices. When she performed on stage, audiences focused on her voice, never realizing the effort it took for her to walk with grace. Her charm and humor made her a favorite with troops during World War II, when she became the girl-next-door face of USO tours. Dancer with hidden arthritis. Gene Kelly looked unstoppable on screen. In Singin' in the Rain, 1952, he tapped through puddles with a grin that seemed effortless. But years of punishing rehearsals and non-stop performances came with a price. By middle age, Kelly was battling arthritis and chronic back pain that followed him for the rest of his life. Kelly was famous for demanding routines. He rehearsed until his feet bled, pushed his body into acrobatic leaps, and expected the same from his partners. Those long days built his reputation as Hollywood's most athletic dancer, but they also wore down his joints. By the 1960s, the pain became impossible to ignore. On set, Kelly adjusted choreography to protect himself. He favored sharp, quick moves that looked stylish but saved stress on his knees and back. Directors worked around his limits, framing shots so the audience never saw him favoring one side. He still dazzled, but every number came with pain. Off-screen, he tried therapy and rest, but arthritis only worsened. By his later years, he needed help with simple movement and eventually suffered a series of strokes. Even so, Kelly never admitted weakness while cameras were rolling. To fans, he remained the picture of energy and charm. Star with a hidden stutter. Jimmy Stewart's halting voice became one of the most recognizable sounds in film history. His slow drawl, broken by pauses, made him seem thoughtful and honest. Audiences assumed it was part of his style, but in truth, it came from a stutter he had carried since childhood. As a boy in Pennsylvania, Stewart struggled to get words out. The stutter made him nervous in school and in early-stage work. Teachers and acting coaches encouraged him to slow his pace, letting pauses fill the space when his speech caught. Over time, what began as a coping method turned into his trademark rhythm. By the time he reached Hollywood in the 1930s, Stewart had mastered turning the stutter into an advantage. In Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, 1939, his halting delivery added weight to speeches about honesty and justice. In It's a Wonderful Life, 1946, the pauses made him sound vulnerable and real. Few realized those quirks were tools to mask a speech disorder. On set, directors sometimes worried his voice was too hesitant, but audiences loved it. Stewart leaned into the pattern, making it part of his identity. Off-screen, he still faced moments when words stuck, but friends said he handled it with humor and patience. The stutter never went away, but Stewart built a career around it instead of hiding it. He proved that even a speech disorder could become a signature one that helped turn him into one of America's most beloved stars. Leading man in disguise. Alan Ladd didn't look like the typical Hollywood tough guy. He was only 5'6", far shorter than most leading men of the 1940s. On top of that, he carried scars from a childhood accident when he fell onto a hot stovetop. The burns left marks on his body, reminders of a painful beginning. Studios knew his size could be a problem in an industry that worshipped tall heroes. Cameramen got creative. They shot Ladd from low angles, paired him with shorter actresses, and used lifts in his shoes. Scenes were staged so he looked commanding, even when he was standing next to actors much taller than him. The strategy worked. In films like This Gun for Hire, 1942, and Shane, 1953, Ladd projected quiet strength. Audiences never noticed the tricks behind the camera. They saw a steely presence who could carry a Western or a crime thriller with ease. But Ladd lived with constant insecurity about his height. Co-stars remembered him avoiding publicity shots that might expose the difference. The scars from his accident also made him self-conscious, though they were rarely visible on screen. He relied on Hollywood magic to cover what he thought of as flaws. Despite the hidden challenges, Alan Ladd became one of the most bankable stars of his era.
One of these men lit himself on fire on live television. Another once broke up a real gang fight between extras. And number 6, he destroyed his entire face, then smiled about it. You think actors are soft? Think again. Bronson's prison yard training. He didn't grow up with movie dreams. Charles Bronson grew up with a shovel. Born in 1921 in a Pennsylvania coal town, he was one of 15 children. The family spoke Lithuanian at home and didn't have running water. By age 10, he was working in the mines to help buy food. After World War II, where he served as a tail gunner in the Air Force, Bronson drifted west and tried acting. He wasn't polished. He wasn't charming. Studios didn't know what to do with him. He had the look of someone who'd been in real fights. Because he had. Most actors trained at private gyms. Bronson didn't. He worked out in prison yards. Real ones. He trained with ex-cons and day laborers who didn't care about technique, just strength and grit. He wanted to look like he could hurt someone. And he did. Push-ups on gravel. Rope climbs with no gloves. Makeshift weights made from scrap metal. No music. No mirrors. Just bruises and calluses. That's how he built the body you see on screen. By the mid-1950s, he started landing small parts. War movies, westerns, tough guy roles. Directors didn't cast him for dialogue. They cast him because when he looked at you, it felt like a threat. On set, he refused stunt doubles. Said they were a waste of time. During a fight scene in The Magnificent Seven, he accidentally knocked another actor out cold. They kept filming. The crew didn't even blink. He didn't talk much. Didn't smile unless he had to. Didn't care if you liked him. He came to work, did the job, and left. Simple as that. Clint Eastwood once said Bronson wasn't acting. That's just how he was. Bronson didn't move to Hollywood to chase fame. He moved because it was warmer than the coal fields of Pennsylvania. The rest? That was just muscle and timing. Lee Marvin gets shot, keeps filming. He was tough before he ever hit a movie set. He fought in World War II as a Marine, saw combat in the Pacific, and was shot in the back during the Battle of Saipan. One bullet clipped his spine. Another nearly took his sciatic nerve. He spent over a year in recovery. They gave him a medical discharge. He was 21. Lee Marvin didn't talk about the war much. When people asked, he'd just say, "I got off easy," which tells you everything. In the 60s, he became the face of rough, violent men on screen. No-nonsense detectives, vengeful loners, hired guns with dead eyes. The voice was deep. The stare was colder. In 1967, he filmed Point Blank, a violent, gritty revenge story. The movie was shot mostly on location, real streets, real buildings, real bruises. During one take, a squib, the kind of small charge used to fake bullet hits, misfired and caught him in the ribs. It wasn't serious enough for the hospital, but it tore skin and caused a deep welt. He didn't stop. He finished the scene, stayed in character, and never asked for a second take. Later, when someone on set asked if he was okay, he looked down, wiped the blood off his shirt, and said, "I've had worse." Then he lit a cigarette. That wasn't rare for him. Marvin hated fakes. He did his own fight scenes, most of his stunts, and pushed to keep things realistic, even if it meant someone getting hurt. Off-screen, he wasn't exactly mellow. He drank hard, brawled in bars, and had a temper that made directors nervous. But he showed up on time, knew his lines, and didn't complain. That made him easy to hire, even if it meant a little chaos. He once said, "If I wasn't acting, I'd probably be in jail." Maybe. Or maybe he'd still be in uniform. Eastwood's freezing river stunt. By 1971, Clint Eastwood had already carved out his image. Quiet, calm, deadly. Dirty Harry would lock it in. The role wasn't just about holding a gun. It was about holding your nerve. And Eastwood had plenty. Late in the film, there's a chase that ends with Harry diving into a rock quarry pond. What most people didn't know: that water wasn't just cold, it was near freezing. Not special effects, not a set. Just runoff, rain-fed, and stagnant. Producers offered a stunt double. He refused. Said it wouldn't feel real. Said it wouldn't be real. They rolled cameras. He jumped. 8 times. No wetsuit. No padding, no heat lamps. He surfaced with his face tight and his breath short, but he never called cut. Between takes, crew members offered warm towels and hot drinks. He took the towel, gave it back, and went in again. People on set said the water smelled bad. He never said a word about it. He'd done worse before. On Rawhide, he was known for taking real falls off horses. On Hang 'Em High, he let himself be pulled by a noose just to get the shot right. When a rope burn left a scar, he shrugged it off. That's what separated him. Eastwood never made a scene about doing a stunt. He didn't joke around. He didn't act like a hero. He just did the thing no one else wanted to do and did it like it was normal. Years later, a crew member said Clint didn't even change his expression after the last take. Just walked out, dried off, and said, "All right, what's next?" That quarry scene helped turn Dirty Harry into a hit. People felt the weight of it, because it wasn't fake. The water was freezing, the fall was real, and the man doing it was exactly who he looked like. Eastwood didn't perform toughness. He showed up with it. Robert Mitchum's Chain Gang Days. He wasn't shocked when the cops came for him. It was 1948, and he'd just been caught at a party in L.A. with marijuana. At the time, that wasn't just a bad headline, it was a career-ending scandal. Studios freaked out. Reporters circled. Most actors would have denied everything. Mitchum didn't bother. He told the press, "Well, it was kind of dull in jail, but I met a lot of nice people." The court gave him a 2-month sentence at a California prison farm, complete with hard labor. He wasn't put in protective custody. No special treatment. He wore the uniform, did the work, and slept in the same barracks as everyone else. Chain gangs weren't a joke. Days started early. Inmates cleared brush, worked road crews, and hauled gear under the sun. Mitchum didn't complain. He actually posed for photos behind the fence, smirking. He told a reporter he was getting a tan and learning about real acting. When he got out, he went right back to work. Most stars would have tried to hide it. Mitchum didn't care. He treated the whole thing like a press junket. Studios expected his career to fall apart. Instead, ticket sales went up. Within months, he was back on screen in Rachel and the stranger opposite Loretta Young and William Holden. The scandal didn't touch the box office. If anything, it made him more appealing. People liked that he didn't flinch. He didn't fake an apology. He didn't play victim. He just owned it. Years later, Mitchum said, "The only difference between me and most actors is that I never learned to keep my mouth shut." He wasn't a method actor. He didn't rehearse much. But he had presence, attitude, and a voice that sounded like gravel in a coffee can. Directors said he was lazy, but always perfect on the first take. He never tried to be a role model. He smoked, drank, got in fights, and kept showing up to work. Jail didn't slow him down. If anything, it made him harder to ignore. Jack Palance lights himself on fire. He wasn't afraid of fire. In fact, he once lit his own arm on fire on national television just to prove a point. That wasn't a movie stunt. That was real life, on Ripley's Believe It or Not. In 1982, he was co-hosting the show, standing next to a table with a small flame-retardant cream display. The idea was simple. Apply the cream, light the sleeve, and show it wouldn't burn. The producers wanted a technician to do it. Palance said, "No, I've got it." The sleeve went up in flames, not a little puff, actual fire. The studio audience gasped. The crew panicked. Palance didn't move. He kept talking as the flames danced on his arm. When it burned out, he casually brushed off the ashes and cracked a smile. He didn't even flinch. That wasn't unusual for him. Palance had a long history of doing things his way. During World War II, he was a bomber pilot trainee. A fiery crash during training left his face severely burned. He went through multiple surgeries and came out looking harder than before. When he got to Hollywood, directors didn't cast him as a pretty boy. He played killers, brawlers, and guys who looked like they could break bones just by glaring. He often insisted on doing his own stunts, even in his 60s. He trained as a boxer, sparred regularly, and once did one-arm push-ups on live TV at age 73. Not once. Several. At the Oscars. People said he was difficult. He didn't care. If he thought a script was weak, he'd say so. If he didn't like a co-star, he'd let them know. But when the cameras rolled, he was all business. The fire stunt became a legend, not just because he did it, but because he did it without warning. No special effects, no prep crew. Just a man who knew what pain felt like and didn't fear it. He didn't act fearless. He actually was. Mickey Rourke breaks his face. In the early 90s, Mickey Rourke was tired of acting. He'd gone from critical darling to tabloid magnet. Instead of chasing roles, he made a left turn straight into a boxing ring. Not celebrity boxing, actual professional fights. He trained like a real fighter. 6 days a week. Ran, sparred, took hits. His trainer, Freddie Roach, said Rourke could have gone far if he'd started 10 years earlier. But Mickey wasn't in it for titles. He said he missed the violence. He wanted to feel something again. Between 1991 and 1994, he fought 8 matches. Undefeated, with 6 wins and 2 draws. But the cost was brutal. He broke his nose, twice, shattered his cheekbone, cracked ribs, damaged his tongue. Doctors warned he might lose movement in his face. He kept going anyway. By 1992, his face was unrecognizable. Bones had shifted. His skin looked swollen. He underwent multiple surgeries just to breathe and chew properly. One operation went wrong and made things worse. Hollywood didn't know what to do with him. The handsome, smirking heartthrob from 9.5 weeks had been replaced by a thick-jawed, scarred version of himself. Casting offers stopped. Directors backed off. but he didn't seem to care. He was living in a small apartment, hanging with his dogs, training, and staying out of the spotlight. When asked if he regretted it, he said, "I'd rather be punched in the face than kiss someone's ass in Hollywood." Years later, he slowly returned. The Wrestler in 2008 brought him back. He played a washed-up fighter with a broken body because that's who he was. Rourke didn't fake toughness. He didn't need to. He lived through broken bones, bad press, ruined looks, and still came back swinging. Most actors avoid pain. Rourke chased it. Danny Trejo breaks up riot. His face tells a story, but his past? That's another level. Before he ever stepped in front of a camera, he did time in San Quentin. Armed robbery, drug charges, solitary confinement, the real stuff. By the time he got out, he wasn't just clean. He was dangerous in a different way, calm, controlled, and respected. In the early 90s, Trejo was working on a low-budget movie in East LA. The set had hired local gang members as extras. It was supposed to be a street scene. But tension built fast. Two rival sets recognized each other. Trash talk turned to threats. People started reaching for weapons. The director froze. Security backed off. But Trejo stepped in. He walked right into the middle of the crowd and didn't raise his voice. He just said, "Not here, not now, this is my set." They stopped. Not because he was yelling, but because they knew who he was. He wasn't a celebrity. He was one of them. A guy who'd done time, earned respect, and walked the walk. Within minutes, the tension broke. The scene got filmed. No blood, no cops, just Trejo. It wasn't the first time he stepped in like that. On other sets, he helped young actors stay clean, talked to extras struggling with addiction. Producers didn't hire him for PR. They hired him because he could handle chaos. He started acting by accident. He was helping a friend stay sober and ended up on a movie set. A casting agent saw him and said, "You look like a convict." He smiled and said, "I am." Trejo's roles have ranged from action villains to taco commercials, but his real life beats any script. He's been stabbed, shot at, and locked up. Now he runs recovery centers and youth outreach programs when he's not filming. He once said, "Everything good that's happened to me is from helping someone else." That day on set, he didn't throw a punch. He didn't yell. He just stood there, steady, and that was enough. Tom Cruise hangs off plane. He doesn't fake stunts. If there's a way to do it for real, he'll do it. And in Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, he proved it again by hanging off the side of a military transport plane. For real. No green screen. No tricks. It was an Airbus A400M, a four-engine military aircraft designed to haul tanks. Cruise was strapped to the door by a thin harness, wearing a gray suit and wind goggles. The plane accelerated down the runway and took off, with Cruise clinging to the outside at 5,000 feet. They filmed it 8 times. Each take lasted several minutes. He was hit by wind, debris, and freezing air. A bird strike was a real concern. So was temporary blindness from wind exposure. Cruise had to keep his eyes open during the shot. He trained for weeks just to withstand the pressure. The studio was nervous. Insurance agents were horrified. The crew kept asking if he was sure. He kept saying yes. They even had a backup plan, film the shot with a stuntman and swap his face in post. Cruise refused. He said the audience would know. And that was the point. He's done this before. In Ghost Protocol, he scaled the Burj Khalifa. In Fallout, he did a halo jump from 25,000 feet. He also broke his ankle mid-jump, finished the take, and didn't stop filming. For Cruise, it's not about proving something, it's about control. He once said, "If I'm going to die, I want it to be on my terms." A little intense, but it explains a lot. The airplane stunt made headlines. Behind-the-scenes footage showed how dangerous it really was. One wrong move, one gear failure, and it was over. But Cruise didn't flinch. He hit his mark, gave the signal, and trusted the pilot. Most actors talk about pushing limits. Cruise just does it, then goes home, rewatches the footage, and plans something bigger. Keanu's spine surgery, no pain meds. In 1997, Keanu Reeves was getting ready to film The Matrix. He had one problem: his spine was falling apart. Doctors found that 2 of his spinal discs were severely compressed. One had started to calcify, his legs were going numb, he needed surgery fast. He went under the knife just weeks before stunt training began. It was a delicate operation. One bad move could have paralyzed him. But Reeves didn't delay production. He showed up to Kung Fu rehearsal wearing a neck brace. He could barely kick. So for the first few months, the stunt team focused only on arm moves and upper body forms. He pushed through it, no painkillers. He wanted to stay mentally sharp and didn't want meds clouding his head during choreography. That kind of training was brutal. Most actors would have taken 6 months off. Keanu didn't. He showed up every day, quiet and focused, learning complex martial arts scenes while hiding nerve damage. The crew didn't even know he was recovering from surgery. One of the stunt coordinators later said, "We just thought he was a little stiff." He didn't talk about the pain. He didn't use it as an excuse. When it came time to film, he nailed it. The backflips, the wire work, the slow-motion kicks, you'd never guess he was healing from spinal surgery the whole time. And that wasn't the only time he powered through something ugly. Keanu has filmed through broken ribs, busted ankles, and injuries from motorcycle crashes. He just doesn't broadcast it. He once said, "Pain is just part of life. You can't let it stop you." He's known for being calm, generous, and a little mysterious. But under all that is a guy who works harder than anyone, complains less than anyone, and shrugs off pain like it's no big deal. For The Matrix, he wasn't just pretending to be superhuman. He was already halfway there. Jason Statham's truck rescue dive. He was supposed to drive a stunt truck, fire a prop gun, and stop just short of a dock. Easy scene, done it 100 times. But on The Expendables 3, something went wrong. The brakes failed. Instead of stopping, the truck shot off the edge and plunged straight into the Black Sea. Everyone on set froze. The truck sank fast. No stunt double, no safety crew inside. Just Statham. Most people panic underwater. He didn't. He kicked out the driver's side window and swam to the surface. No air tank. No wetsuit. Just raw instincts and years of diving experience. Before acting, Statham was a competitive diver for Britain's national team. For 12 years, he trained full-time, performing high dives and complex flips. That background probably saved his life. Crew members thought he'd be shaken. He wasn't. He swam back to shore, shook off the water, and asked when they were filming the next shot. Sylvester Stallone later said, "We'd all be dead. But not Jason. He's the real deal." He wasn't trying to be a hero. He just acted fast. And afterward, he didn't brag. He didn't ask for the footage to go viral. He just wanted the scene redone, this time with working breaks. That kind of mindset is what makes him different. Statham doesn't use stunt doubles. In The Transporter, he trained in Krav Maga, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and even did his own driving. In Crank, he hung off a helicopter 3,000 feet up. No rigging, just straps and confidence. He once said, "If I'm not doing my own stunts, I'm not doing my job." What happened in the Black Sea wasn't part of the script. It wasn't a movie moment. It was real. Cold water, a sinking truck, no backup plan, and Statham handled it like it was just another Tuesday.
You've seen actors pretend to be tough, but what about the ones who actually lived it? The coal miners, the war veterans, the daredevils who refused to fake a single punch. This is their story. Douglas Fairbanks, the original daredevil. Long before stunt doubles became standard, Douglas Fairbanks was already putting his life on the line. In the 1910s and 1920s, He built his fame not only through charm, but through raw athletic ability. Audiences came to expect one thing from him: danger performed live on camera. Fairbanks didn't wait for Hollywood to hand him an image. He created it. A trained gymnast and fencer, he used skills from his youth to give silent adventure films a new energy. When cameras rolled on The Mark of Zorro in 1920, he scaled rooftops, swung from balconies, and landed jumps that would break most men. Every leap was his, no tricks behind the curtain. The daring grew bigger with Robin Hood in 1922. Studios spent nearly $1 million to build a massive castle set, and Fairbanks climbed every inch of it. He charged across stone walls, battled dozens of extras with swords, and leapt into the air without hesitation. Crowds were stunned, and critics labeled him the screen's king of swashbucklers. His risk-taking wasn't a one-off. In The Thief of Baghdad, 1924, he pushed even further. Scenes showed him swinging from enormous ropes, balancing high above the set, and diving into action without safety nets. The film's budget ballooned past $2 million, gigantic for its time, but much of the spectacle rested on Fairbanks's physical endurance. He gave audiences a thrill they couldn't find anywhere else. Off-set, his lifestyle matched the screen persona. He kept strict fitness routines, trained with Olympic-level coaches, and insisted that no one else could perform his stunts better. His confidence sometimes clashed with directors, but it worked. Box office numbers kept climbing, and moviegoers lined up to see what stunt he would risk next. Errol Flynn, Hollywood's wild swordsman. Chaos often followed Errol Flynn, both on and off screen. By the late 1930s, he was the studio's go-to swashbuckler, and Warner Brothers leaned into his appetite for risk. When cameras rolled on Captain Blood in 1935, Flynn fought with real steel. He trained under fencing master Fred Cavens, but he refused to slow down for safety. The duels moved at near combat speed, and audiences could feel it. 2 years later came The Adventures of Robin Hood. Flynn didn't hold back. The sword fights with Basil Rathbone became Hollywood legends because neither man wanted to fake it. In one sequence, their blades struck so hard that sparks actually flew. Rathbone later admitted that Flynn was reckless but brilliant, a natural in battle scenes. Offset, danger didn't stop. Flynn's passion for sailing pushed him into storms off the coast of Cuba. One trip nearly killed him when his yacht smashed against rocks. Rescuers barely pulled him out in time. Instead of learning caution, he sailed again weeks later. Friends joked that he chased near-death experiences as if they were hobbies. Bar fights added to the legend. Flynn's nights in Los Angeles clubs often ended with broken glasses, bruised knuckles, and gossip column write-ups. His reputation as Hollywood's wild man was earned, not invented. Even Warner Brothers executives, desperate to protect their star, admitted he was uncontrollable once he had a drink in his hand. Stunt doubles were rarely used. In films like The Seahawk, 1940, Flynn clambered up rigging, swung onto decks, and fought full crews with a grin. Accidents happened, but he shrugged them off and kept shooting. Producers knew insurance costs were rising, but Flynn's charisma on-screen guaranteed profits. The press loved reporting his antics. Headlines mixed his film heroics with stories of real brawls, making it hard to separate the man from the character. His adventurous life fed the myth, and Warner Brothers leaned on that image even as they struggled to control him behind the scenes. John Wayne, the cowboy who kept riding. In Hollywood westerns, toughness was expected, but John Wayne lived it long after cameras stopped. His rise came in the 1930s with smaller roles, but even then he insisted on doing his own riding. Horses threw him, saddles broke, and dust filled his lungs, yet he never asked for a stand-in. By the late 1930s, Wayne's physical resilience became part of his brand. On the set of Stagecoach in 1939, director John Ford pushed him through grueling desert shoots. Temperatures soared over 100 degrees, and cast members fainted under the heat. Wayne kept riding, sweating through, take after take. Ford later admitted that Wayne's endurance helped sell the image of the unshakable cowboy. Injuries followed him throughout the 1940s and 1950s. Falls during fight scenes cracked ribs, and long shoots left him with chronic pain in his shoulder. Yet when asked, he brushed it off with a joke and walked back into the next shot. His refusal to slow down impressed crews who saw the punishment he absorbed. By the 1960s, Wayne was already battling health issues. He underwent surgery for cancer in 1964, losing a lung and several ribs. Doctors advised rest. Wayne ignored them. Within months, he was back on horseback, filming The Sons of Katie Elder. His gait looked stiffer, but his presence on screen stayed commanding. Audiences never knew how badly his body hurt. The punishment only increased in True Grit, 1969. Wayne, wearing an eye patch as Rooster Cogburn, insisted on charging his horse through streams and rocky terrain himself. When he won the Academy Award for the role, reporters noted that he filmed with the same grit his character carried. Even in the 1970s, when age slowed him, Wayne refused to fake it. In The Shootist, 1976, his final film, he performed horseback scenes while fighting advanced cancer. Crew members said he refused offers of body doubles, determined to finish his career the way he started, by doing it himself. Kirk Douglas, the Chin of Steel. He earned his reputation the hard way. In the late 1940s, he broke through with Champion, 1949, playing a ruthless boxer. The fight scenes weren't staged at half speed. Douglas absorbed real hits to make the punches look convincing. Crew members recalled that he left the set bruised almost every night, but he insisted that audiences deserved authenticity. His intensity only grew with larger productions. In The Vikings, 1958, Douglas clashed swords on icy terrain. One scene ended with a broken tooth after a mistimed strike. He spat blood, reset himself, and finished the day's shoot. Later, he admitted that the pain was real, but claimed it kept the film from looking fake. His stubbornness gave directors confidence that he could survive anything. The most famous ordeal came with Spartacus, 1960. Douglas not only starred, but produced the epic. Long battle sequences were filmed under blazing sun, and he personally charged into lines of armored extras. Falls from horses and rough sword duels left him battered, but he refused to delegate the action. Friends warned that he was risking long-term injury. He waved them off, convinced that leading an army on screen meant leading it for real. As decades passed, his toughness extended far beyond film sets. In 1991, at age 74, Douglas boarded a helicopter near Santa Paula, California. Minutes after takeoff, it collided mid-air with a small plane. The crash killed 2 other passengers. Douglas survived with serious back injuries but stunned reporters by walking out of the hospital days later. He later admitted he was haunted by the tragedy, yet the fact that he lived at all seemed miraculous. 3 years later, a stroke left him with impaired speech. Most actors would have retired quietly. Douglas instead fought through therapy and returned to public life. In 1996, he walked on stage at the Academy Awards to a standing ovation. His voice was slurred, but his spirit wasn't broken. He even published books and gave interviews well into his 90s, often joking that nothing could keep him down for long. Steve McQueen, the King of Cool, Under Fire. His career took off in the late 1950s with Wanted, Dead or Alive, where he carried himself with the swagger of a man who had already survived more than most. Raised in reform schools in the Marine Corps, McQueen brought that toughness into Hollywood with a chip on his shoulder. By the 1960s, his obsession with racing was no secret. McQueen spent weekends on motorcycles and sports cars, often entering professional competitions. In 1962, he placed second at the Elsinore Grand Prix, riding against seasoned racers. Studios worried that a crash could end their investment, but McQueen ignored warnings. He famously said, "Racing is life. Anything before or after is just waiting." That mindset carried into his films. In The Great Escape, 1963, McQueen insisted on doing much of his own motorcycle work. The legendary fence jump was finished by stuntman Bud Ekins, but the rest of the high-speed chases across German fields were McQueen himself. He skidded, crashed, and got back up until director John Sturges called it good. Fans still debate which shots were him, which was the point. He blurred the line between actor and stuntman. His most famous dare came with Bullitt, 1968. The car chase through San Francisco streets became one of cinema's most iconic sequences. McQueen drove the Mustang himself for most of the chase, hitting speeds that alarmed insurance agents. During one take, he nearly lost control on a corner, missing a camera rig by inches. Warner Brothers executives begged him to let a double finish, but McQueen pushed through. The result cemented him as Hollywood's definitive action star. Racing off-screen nearly killed him. At the 12 Hours of Sebring endurance race in 1970, McQueen competed with a broken foot held together by a cast. Driving a Porsche 908, he and teammate Peter Revson finished second against professionals. Reporters couldn't believe he had endured the pain for 12 hours behind the wheel. Friends later admitted he risked permanent damage, but McQueen dismissed the concern. Even when illness struck in the late 1970s, he didn't soften. Diagnosed with mesothelioma, McQueen continued racing and performing stunts until his body could no longer handle it. Charles Bronson, tough man of the steel mills. Before Hollywood, survival meant coal mines. Charles Bronson grew up in Pennsylvania as one of 15 children in a Lithuanian-American family. His father died when he was 10, leaving the family in poverty. By 16, Bronson was working in the mines himself, covered in soot and hauling loads heavier than his frame suggested. The grit of those early years never left him. World War II gave him another trial. Bronson served as a tail gunner on a B-29 bomber in the Pacific. The role was one of the most dangerous in the service. Gunner compartments were cramped, vulnerable, and often the first targets of enemy fire. He survived missions that killed many of his fellow airmen and returned home with a Purple Heart. That real-life experience hardened him long before the cameras rolled. When he entered acting in the 1950s, Bronson carried himself with quiet intensity. He wasn't the charming lead, he was the tough man in the corner, the one directors cast when they needed authenticity. In House of Wax, 1953, and later The Magnificent Seven, 1960, his performances drew from a life already marked by danger and labor. On set, he didn't act delicate. Bronson was known for doing fight scenes full force, sometimes leaving his co-stars with real bruises. In The Dirty Dozen, 1967, his military background gave him credibility, and he powered through punishing action sequences with little complaint. Other actors remembered him as the most serious man on set, someone who never needed to be reminded to look tough. He was tough. By the 1970s, Bronson had become an international star through films like Death Wish. The vigilante action scenes were shot in rough New York neighborhoods, and the actor demanded to be in the middle of them. Crew members recalled his ability to perform long nights of filming without showing fatigue. His stoicism impressed colleagues, but also made him intimidating. Few dared to joke around with him. Lee Marvin, brawler turned actor. War shaped him before Hollywood ever did. Lee Marvin enlisted in the U.S. Marines during World War II and fought in the Battle of Saipan in 1944. He was shot in the buttocks by machine gun fire, the bullet severing his sciatic nerve. The injury ended his combat service, but he carried the limp for the rest of his life. That limp later gave his screen presence a rough edge no acting school could teach. Back in the States, Marvin drifted into acting, bringing his real battlefield experience into every role. He started with small parts in the early 1950s, often cast as villains or soldiers. His scarred face and deep, gravelly voice made him stand out instantly. Directors knew they were hiring someone who didn't have to pretend toughness, he lived it. Off-screen, Marvin's barroom reputation grew almost as quickly as his film credits. Stories of fistfights in New York and Los Angeles followed him. He drank hard, fought harder, and rarely walked away clean. Yet the chaos only added to his aura. By the mid-1950s, producers were both worried about his temper and eager to capture his raw energy on screen. On film sets, he refused to coast. In The Big Heat, 1953, Marvin shocked audiences by playing a brutal gangster who scars Gloria Graham's character with boiling coffee. The scene was staged but drew on his natural intensity. In The Dirty Dozen, 1967, He led an ensemble of actors through grueling military drills, insisting on realism in every shot. Co-stars later recalled that he treated training days like real boot camp. Stunt doubles were offered, but Marvin avoided them whenever possible. In fight scenes, he often connected for real. Actors who worked with him joked that a punch from Marvin was part of the job. His willingness to take and deliver hits kept scenes from looking staged. As his fame grew, the contradictions followed. Marvin could be generous and funny one moment, then unpredictable and violent the next. His toughness wasn't carefully managed, like a studio image. It was who he was. Bruce Lee, the fighter who changed cinema. Martial arts weren't a hobby for Bruce Lee. They were survival. Growing up in Hong Kong during the 1940s, street fights were common, and Lee rarely backed down. By his teenage years, he trained under Wing Chun master Ip Man, sharpening skills that would later shake global cinema. When he moved to the United States in the late 1950s, Lee taught martial arts while trying to break into acting. Students included actors, athletes, and even future Hollywood stars. His reputation spread not because of flashy demonstrations, but because he fought with precision and intensity that startled anyone who stepped into his studio. Television gave him his first big showcase. As Kato in The Green Hornet, 1966, Lee stole scenes with explosive movements that looked faster than the cameras could catch. American audiences had never seen fight choreography delivered with such speed. What looked like trick editing was often just Lee moving at full power. Film roles in Hong Kong elevated him further. The Big Boss, 1971, and Fist of Fury, 1972, showed Lee dismantling opponents with strikes and kicks delivered in long takes. Directors didn't need quick cuts. Lee's timing carried the action. Audiences roared in theaters, and his fame spread across Asia. By the time Enter the Dragon premiered in 1973, Lee had become a global phenomenon. He choreographed most of the film's combat himself, insisting that fights look brutal and believable. On set, he demanded his partners strike at him with real force, adjusting movements until they matched his standards. Stuntmen later admitted that working with him left bruises but also gave them credibility. Away from cameras, Lee tested himself constantly. He entered full-contact sparring sessions with world-class fighters, never turning down a challenge. Stories circulated of him flooring opponents in seconds, though Lee avoided bragging. His focus stayed on refining technique and proving that martial arts could be both art and discipline. Though his life ended tragically at 32, Bruce Lee left behind a record of toughness that combined street fights, film sets, and cultural barriers. Mickey Rourke, boxer with a Hollywood comeback. Comebacks in Hollywood usually mean a new role. For Mickey Rourke, it meant stepping out of the ring after years of punishment. In the early 1980s, he broke through with Body Heat and Diner, building a reputation as one of the most talented actors of his generation. But he also carried a streak of volatility that mirrored his characters. By the early 1990s, Rourke walked away from acting to pursue professional boxing. It wasn't a gimmick. He entered legitimate fights, facing trained opponents in real arenas. Over the course of 8 matches, he compiled an unbeaten record with 6 wins and 2 draws. Reporters covered him not as a celebrity sideshow, but as a legitimate fighter. The cost was steep. Rourke suffered broken ribs, a shattered cheekbone, and a severely damaged nose. Surgeons later reconstructed parts of his face with cartilage taken from his ear. Years of sparring and headshots left him battered, and his looks, the same ones that once drew comparisons to Brando, were permanently altered. Friends pleaded with him to stop, but he kept training until the damage became impossible to ignore. When he returned to Hollywood in the late 1990s, producers were hesitant. His appearance had changed, his reputation was rough, and his career looked finished. Yet Rourke refused to quit. Small parts in films like Once Upon a Time in Mexico slowly rebuilt interest, showing that his screen presence hadn't disappeared with his old looks. Then came The Wrestler, 2008. Playing Randy the Ram Robinson, Rourke poured his real injuries and scars into the performance. Training with professional wrestlers, he executed punishing moves in the ring, absorbing blows that most actors would never attempt. Critics noted that the role felt autobiographical, an aging performer fighting for relevance through physical pain. The film earned him a Golden Globe and an Academy Award nomination. Even after The Wrestler, Rourke continued balancing film with combat sports. He sparred, trained, and even entered a professional boxing match in Moscow in 2014 at age 62. While the fight sparked debate, it confirmed what his life had always shown. Mickey Rourke never stopped testing himself against pain. Tom Cruise, Hollywood stunt addict. Studios spend millions trying to keep their stars safe. Tom Cruise spends millions proving he doesn't need the safety net. Since the 1980s, he's been pushing himself into stunts that most professionals would turn down. What started as a few risky moves in Top Gun grew into an obsession that defined his career. In Mission Impossible, 1996, Cruise began by dangling from wires in a high-security vault. That sequence became iconic, but it was only the start. For the sequel in 2000, he climbed sheer rock faces in Utah without a harness for key shots. By 2011's Ghost Protocol, Cruise raised the bar again. He strapped himself to the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, the world's tallest building, and sprinted across glass windows more than 1,000 feet in the air. Safety wires were hidden, but the danger was real. Behind the scenes, clips showed crew members stunned that he even attempted it. The risks kept escalating. During Rogue Nation 2015, Cruise hung onto the side of a military plane as it took off, enduring winds at over 100 miles per hour. The stunt required 8 takes, and each time he was actually bolted to the aircraft. Co-star Simon Pegg later admitted the crew couldn't believe what they were watching. In Fallout 2018, he chased villains across rooftops in London. A miscalculated jump left him with a broken ankle as cameras rolled. Instead of stopping, he pulled himself up, finished the sprint, and only then collapsed. The shot stayed in the final cut, proving his determination to finish no matter the cost. Even into his 60s, Cruise hasn't slowed down. For Dead Reckoning Part 1, 2023, he drove a motorcycle off a cliff in Norway, parachuting into a canyon. He repeated the stunt multiple times to get the angle right. Director Christopher McQuarrie called it the most dangerous sequence ever attempted for film. While Hollywood uses doubles, green screens, and digital tricks, he insists on the real thing. Every risk, every injury, every terrifying leap belongs to him.